don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FIRE. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FIRE instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. Hello my friend, whatever you're up to today, I do hope you're doing well. Now on the last episode, I looked at the benefits of lean FIRE and why it could be a really interesting FIRE milestone to aim for. And while it's actually a quicker path to FIRE compared to traditional FIRE and fat FIRE, there's even a faster way to get to lean FIRE. And I'll tell you right now what it is, and it's by combining it with Geographic Arbitrage or Geoarbitrage, and it's what I'll be discussing today. Alright, let's get into it. So you likely already know what lean FIRE is, but feel free to listen to episode 95, the previous episode, if you wanted a quick outline. With Geoarbitrage, on the other hand, this is essentially moving from a high cost of living area to a low cost of living area, but still receiving the same level of income before you relocated. And that's the epitome of Geoarbitrage. But I also think just moving from a high cost of living area to a low cost of living area is already considered, in some ways, Geoarbitrage. Even if you're not getting exactly what you were getting before, but at least a decent amount. Now you can do this in two ways. The first one is by relocating during your accumulation phase, thereby reducing your expenses on your way to FIRE. And the second way is calculating a geographic arbitrage lifestyle in retirement, thereby reducing your total FIRE number target. Now in terms of physical location, there's two types of geoarbitrage. There's domestic geoarbitrage, so that's moving to a different city in your current country, or international geoarbitrage, that's moving to another country, and that's typically Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, or South America, because of the lower living costs in those areas. There's obviously other areas to think about, but those are the most common ones. Anyway, I talk about geoarbitrage way back in episodes 12 to 14 if you want to hear more detail about it. Geographic arbitrage helps reduce the three largest expense brackets of accommodation, food, and travel all in one fell swoop. To give you a better idea of the financial benefits, let's look at some rough living costs in typical high cost of living cities compared to some low cost of living ones. So just to get a rough monthly cost of living from different cities, I use nomads.com, formerly Nomad Lists, and they use real-time crowdsourced data to get their information. Now their figures are based on monthly living expenses for one person, and that includes accommodation, food, transportation, and general day-to-day expenses. Now this isn't an exact science, and of course, living costs may wildly differ from person to person based on their preferences and budget. But this is just to give a rough idea. So I looked at monthly living costs in cities in your typical high cost of living areas like the US, Australia, UK, and Canada. And from the cities that I looked at, it ranged from $4,300 or USD in Toronto, Canada, to around $6,200 in Boston, United States. Now, just to give you a flavour of some examples in between that range, here are some other monthly costs in different cities. So Sydney, Australia, and Singapore were both at $4,500 per month. Chicago in the US was $4,800. Seattle on the west coast of US was $5,400. And London, UK, my old stomping ground, was $5,800 a month. So I've estimated an average would be around $5,200 per month of expenses for a high cost of living area for one person. Alright, so let's look at some rough monthly living costs in your typical low cost of living areas. So from my initial look, it ranged from $1,100 in Hanoi, Vietnam, to $1,800 in Manila, Philippines, the country I'm currently in right now. Again, some samples within that range included Chiang Mai in Thailand at 1,300 a month, Lima in Peru at 1,500 a month USD, Medellin in Colombia at 1,600 USD, and Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia at 1,600 USD per month. Now that gives us an average of around 1,500 USD of living expenses per month. That's around a 70% reduction of living costs compared to your average high cost of living cities. Now, of course, there's going to be some costly sort of initial relocation costs to begin with when you do relocate, but when you've actually relocated and living there, that's around a 70% reduction of living costs compared to your average high cost of living cities. That is bonkers, as we say back in UK. Just based on that rough comparison, you could probably see the benefits of relocating to these areas, or even living nomadically and slow travelling between these countries, especially if you're able to retain your salary from the high cost of living area, like going remote. Geographic arbitrage massively reduces your monthly expenses, meaning you're potentially able to save more, which speeds up your journey to lean fire. Or if you just plan to retire in these low cost of living areas, but still living in your high cost of living area during your accumulation phase, it just means you need a smaller nest egg to save up for. That way you can get there quicker. Now I want to share a really quick example of someone who has done this and living it right now. Jean Voronkova and her husband Vitali hit lean fire in 2021 and they moved to Bali in Indonesia. Jean was previously a busy corporate lawyer back in Singapore, and they've been posting about their awesome lean fire journey on YouTube. They were able to hit lean fire as their property investments reached a point where they could draw down a monthly passive income of 1,800 USD. That was enough to cover their monthly living expenses in Bali, and they were able to do this by living a simple and modest lifestyle. Now, of course, they wouldn't have been able to achieve fire with that passive income amount if they still lived in Singapore or any other of those high cost of living areas. Their passive income would only cover less than half of what's needed. This allowed them to start living a life they love much earlier, and they've been living that lean fire lifestyle ever since. Now, I just want to end on something Jean mentioned in one of her videos. She said, "Vitali and I let happiness lead our way. And it worked out better than we ever imagined." I think it's only human that when you're planning something big, we tend to focus on what could go wrong. But what about what could go right? What if things go incredibly well? What if life surprises you? End of quote. I think in the fire community, we're fairly risk averse, and I think it's only natural. We always try to find backup plans to our backup plans. And sometimes we have to take a little bit of a risk that ultimately has some big benefits at the end of it. Like trying out Geoarbitrage, for example. Trying out Geoarbitrage is one example of that. Because you might be stepping into the unknown, especially if it's in another country for a whole different culture. Anyway, I hope that's helped you in some way. Don't forget to follow the show on your podcast player app if you want to hear more about alternative fire strategies and life design. Have an awesome week, and as always, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.